She was a 4-star general celebrated unshakable, until a quiet janitor stepped forward and said 6 words that froze the entire room. "My daughter has your tattoo." What happened next? No one could have predicted. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of kindness, courage, and stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing to our channel. Every week, we share true-to-heart tales that remind us faith never leaves us, even when the world does. Now let's begin. The polished marble floor of the Defense Department's central atrium gleamed like ice under the chandelier light. The room was buzzing with decorated uniforms, the clink of champagne flutes, and the quiet murmurs of rank and respect. At the far end, beneath a towering American flag, stood a long banquet table lined with dignitaries. In the center sat General Lena Hayes, the first woman in American military history to command a joint air combat division. Her face, chiseled with grace and authority, softened only when she raised her glass to acknowledge a roomful of admirers. A dozen paces behind the last row of brass and stars near the back wall, where light dimmed into shadow, a man knelt with a cloth in hand, polishing the marble base of a column. His name was Michael Lane. His green janitor's uniform looked faded compared to the pressed dress blues and deep greens around him. His boots were scuffed, his shoulders slightly hunched, not from weakness, but from years of carrying burdens few would ever understand. By his side sat a girl no older than 8. Her name was Amelia. She wore a simple navy blue dress and held a small, worn-out backpack in her lap legs, swinging softly above the floor. She wasn't looking at the chandeliers or the food. She was staring wide-eyed at the woman at the podium. General Hayes. "Is she the boss of all the planes?" Daddy Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet jazz music echoing through the hall. Michael smiled, wiping his hands on a rag and sitting beside her on the edge of the step. "She is, honey," he said gently. "She commands more than most presidents ever did." Amelia's eyes grew round. "Have you ever met her?" Michael's gaze drifted back toward General Hayes, who was now shaking hands with the senator. A long silence. "No," he said softly. "Not officially." There was no bitterness in his voice, just quiet acceptance. The kind that comes from years of being overlooked, not because you were unworthy, but because the world had already moved on. Around them, conversations bloomed and faded. Officers congratulated one another. Photographers snapped pictures. Somewhere nearby, a speech was being rehearsed. But Michael didn't hear any of it. His eyes lingered on the compass rose emblem engraved into the podium behind Hayes. 8 points. One arrow longer than the rest, marking true north. He looked down at his own hand. A scar ran through the base of his palm, a memory from a broken rotor blade. Below it, faded, but distinct, was a tattoo. A black compass rose. North Star. Beneath it in delicate script, "Faith never leaves you." He hadn't shown that tattoo to anyone in years. Not since the day his name was quietly erased from the records. Not since the command center sent back his discharge papers, marked administrative oversight, untraceable unit, and the system filed him under non-combatant status. To the world, he'd become invisible. But not to Amelia. "Daddy," she whispered again, tugging on his sleeve. Her voice was different this time, more curious, almost awestruck. "She has your tattoo." Michael blinked. "What?" Amelia pointed discreetly across the room. General Hayes had just raised her champagne glass, giving a small toast. As she did, the sleeve of her dark uniform shifted just slightly, revealing the inside of her left wrist. There it was. A black compass rose, exactly the same. Michael's heart stilled. Not a beat skipped, not a gasp drawn. Just stillness, heavy, piercing, ancient. He stared motionless for several seconds. Then slowly, he extended his own hand, palm up, comparing from a distance the curves, the bold center star, the long arrow pointing north. Identical. Suddenly, he was no longer standing in a banquet hall. He was 20 years younger, covered in dust and diesel fire in the air, the rotor of a downed chopper still spinning behind him. A woman's scream, a crash, a decision made in 2 seconds flat, and the ink, the North Star tattoo, burned into his skin just weeks before that mission, a quiet vow among 6 soldiers never meant to be remembered by the world. But here it was, etched on the wrist of a 4-star general in front of hundreds of witnesses. Michael didn't breathe. Amelia watched him closely. "Is she from your team, Daddy?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up slowly, like an old machine, starting to move again after years of rust. His boots made no sound on the marble. His posture straightened, not like a janitor approaching a podium, but like a man stepping back into a truth that had been waiting for him all along. He walked past tables of generals and ambassadors, past confused glances and furrowed brows, until he stood just 10 feet from Lena Hayes. The music had stopped. So had the room. Michael spoke calmly, his voice low, deep, but clear enough to silence every murmur. "Ma'am?" General Hayes turned toward him. At first she looked puzzled, perhaps assuming he was part of the event staff. But then she saw his hand, the tattoo. Her eyes widened. "My daughter," he continued, voice still steady, "has your tattoo." Silence. All around them, dignitaries paused mid-sip. Forks hovered in the air. One officer choked slightly on his drink, but no one spoke. No one moved. General Hayes stared at him, speechless. Her hand dropped slowly to her side, revealing her own tattoo fully now. And then, only barely audible, she whispered the name, North Star. Michael gave a small nod. The room so loud just moments ago felt suddenly like a cathedral. Reverent. Still. Like every eye was holding its breath. Hayes took a step forward. For a moment, it looked like her knees might buckle. She reached instinctively for the back of a chair, steadying herself, not from fear, but from memory, from the weight of something long buried. The silence stretched, not from discomfort, but from recognition. 2 people. 2 tattoos. 2 lives that should have crossed only once in fire and chaos and war, but somehow had met again in marble halls through the voice of a child. Michael didn't smile. He didn't need to, because in that moment, he wasn't a janitor. He wasn't invisible. He was North Star, and he had just spoken the words that would change everything. The echo of silence still hung in the air as General Lena Hayes excused herself from the stage. No music resumed. No chatter returned. It was as if the ballroom itself had paused history to witness something sacred and then refused to resume until it understood what had just happened. She walked briskly through the rear corridor of the Defense Department, polished shoes striking the floor in short, clipped notes. But beneath her composed exterior, her heart thundered with memories. 20 years. 20 years since that call sign. North Star. 20 years since that fire-slick night in the Afghanistan desert. Since her own boots hit the dirt lungs burning with smoke, blood trickling down her scalp, the helicopter behind her erupting in flame. And that hand, his hand grabbing her vest, dragging her through sand and chaos, whispering, "I've got you. You're going to live. That's an order." She never saw his face clearly, just the tattoo, the compass, and the voice that haunted her in dreams, especially on the loneliest nights. Now he had returned, not in a press release, not in a ceremony, but as a janitor. And he had a daughter. She stopped outside the private dining lounge and took a deep breath. When she entered, he was already waiting. Michael Lane stood beside a low table, hands folded calmly. His olive green uniform bore no insignia. His boots were dusty, his long hair tied loosely at the nape. But his eyes, those steady ocean gray eyes, were the same. Lena remembered them not from a photo, but from the heat of war, from a moment when everything was death, and only one thing held her to the world, his grip. In the corner of the room, Amelia was seated, legs dangling over a velvet bench, coloring in a small notebook with red crayon. "She's okay being here?" Lena asked, nodding toward the girl. "She's the reason I came forward," Michael replied. He stepped closer. Calm. Measured. But Lena could feel the weight he carried with each breath. "I didn't mean to interrupt your ceremony," he said softly. "But when my daughter saw your wrist, I couldn't stay in the shadows anymore." Lena slowly raised her hand and turned it over. The room's soft lighting caught the black ink of her inner wrist. The compass. 8 points. One arrow longer than the rest. True north. She looked up. "You still have yours?" Michael extended his right-hand palm up. The tattoo matched perfectly, though more weathered with a faint scar slicing through one of the compass arms. Below it, still legible, after all these years, the words, "Faith never leaves you." Lena's breath caught. "I thought it was just mine," she said quietly. "You were the last one who got it," Michael said. "Before, everything went wrong." She sat down, slowly, eyes not leaving his hand. "Why didn't you come back?" Michael looked down. For a moment his jaw clenched, not in anger, but in the ache of trying to explain something too big, too painful. "I tried," he said. "After that mission, I was airlifted out with a fractured pelvis and smoke damage to my lungs. By the time I came out of surgery, my unit had been redeployed. Paperwork was scrambled. I was missing. Dead according to the system." "But you weren't," Lena whispered. "No," he said, "but I might as well have been. I was processed through a civilian discharge center 2 months later. No rank, no medals, just a typo on a file and a letter thanking me for my service." Her stomach turned. "They erased you." He gave a faint shrug. "Maybe the war just needed fewer heroes." Lena looked away, swallowing the shame. "And all this time, you've been a janitor. I've been a father," Michael said, voice firm. Lena looked back at him. The light in his eyes hadn't dimmed, it had deepened. There was a stillness in him, a peace earned not through medals, but through resilience, through purpose. "How did your daughter get the tattoo?" Lena asked gently. "She didn't," he replied, smiling slightly, "but she drew it. Over and over. In notebooks, on napkins. One night she traced it on my hand with a marker. Said it helped her feel safe." He paused. "She's never seen it on me. I kept it hidden. But somehow, she knew." Lena felt a sting in her eyes. She looked at Amelia again. The little girl was now carefully shading in the edge of a star, with red and black. Does she know what it means? "She knows it points north," Michael said quietly. "That's all that matters." There was silence again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was reflective, healing. Lena reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper, aged frayed at the edges. "I kept this," she said. "I wrote it the week after the crash. I thought you were gone. I never had anyone to send it to." Michael unfolded the paper. His name was there, Captain Michael Lane, written in the steady hand of a woman who had just survived the impossible. "If you're alive, I owe you my life. If you're gone, I carry your courage in my blood. Either way, I will never forget what you gave me." He closed the letter gently, said nothing for a while. "Then I didn't save you for a medal." "I know," she whispered. He looked at her eyes unwavering. "You were the best among us. That's why I ran into that wreckage." She blinked back the welling tears. You should have been here all these years. You should have been celebrated. Michael looked back at Amelia. I was, just in a different way. Lena stood. She reached for his hand again, not to compare tattoos this time, but to shake it. Like equals? No more than that. Like two survivors finally reuniting in peace. I don't know what I'll have to do to fix this, she said, voice firm. But I will. Michael offered a gentle smile. It's not about fixing, just honoring what was real. And what is real, she added, glancing at Amelia. Because that little girl has more compass than most officers I know. Michael chuckled. She's my North Star now. They stood together for a moment in quiet solidarity. Not general and janitor, but two people connected by fire, by faith, and by a symbol that had somehow survived the world's attempt to erase it. A compass. A child. A truth buried, but not broken. And as Lena left the room that night, she didn't walk like a general celebrated by command. She walked like someone who had just rediscovered a piece of herself, long thought lost in the desert. The next morning, the Pentagon was humming again. File carts rolled through marble hallways. Aides in crisp suits whispered over earpieces. And somewhere deep in the command wing, the scent of black coffee drifted over stacks of briefings, marked classified. But one topic had risen above all the others: the janitor and the general. Whispers had spread fast like wildfire through dry grass. Every conversation in the mess halls, locker rooms, and admin floors carried some version of the same question. Did you see it? Was that really him? What did he mean? My daughter has your tattoo. Even the higher brass didn't know what to make of it. Some brushed it off as a misunderstanding. Others knew better. They'd seen the look on General Hayes's face. They'd seen her freeze. By noon, the department had released a short press statement. No comment at this time. That silence spoke louder than any denial could have. And by dusk, as golden rays poured in through the west-facing stained glass windows of the Medal of Valor Memorial Hall, a quiet tension filled the air. Tonight's event was supposed to be routine, a follow-up reception for donors and top-ranking officers. Speeches, wine-polite laughter. But everyone was there for one reason now. They were waiting. And he came. Michael Lane entered through the service corridor, not in a tailored suit or returned uniform, but in the same faded janitor's outfit from the day before. He didn't try to blend in. He didn't try to stand out. He simply walked with the quiet dignity of a man who'd stopped asking the world for applause. Beside him walked Amelia, clutching a worn, leather-bound sketchbook to her chest. She wore a dress a shade darker than before, navy, with a tiny silver star stitched over the heart. Her shoes tapped softly across the marble. The moment they entered, people turned. Not subtly. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Some guests stood straighter. Others leaned in to whisper. And then the sea parted. General Lena Hayes, resplendent in full dress, blues, stepped down from the front of the stage where she had been expected to speak. She didn't wait for protocol, didn't nod to the officers, or senators, or civilian contractors around her. She walked straight to Michael and stood still. Close, almost reverent. Michael looked her in the eyes. He didn't smile. Neither did she. Then he quietly reached down, gently took Amelia's hand, and stepped onto the first stair of the stage. Every eye followed him. He turned not to the general, but to the crowd, officers, politicians, retired, war heroes, lobbyists, faces in medals and starched collars, faces who had written history or rewritten it. And then he said the words, "My daughter has your tattoo." The effect was immediate. It wasn't just shock. It was recognition. Wait. Because these were not just words, they were a code, a signal, an acknowledgement of brotherhood and of betrayal. For a second time in 2 days, the room froze. Michael continued, his voice steady, rich with unpolished authority. She drew it before she ever saw it. Same compass, same ink, same direction. I asked her why once. You know what she said. He looked down at Amelia. She said, because it helps people find their way home. A hush fell like fog over the audience. He turned to General Hayes, but not as a subordinate, as an equal. Ma'am, you and I were part of something that never made it into the history books, a team that burned bright and then was erased. Gasps from a few corners. One older colonel paled slightly, shifting uncomfortably. I was listed dead after Operation Iron Haven. Not KIA, not MIA, just gone. Paperwork said I'd been transferred to another base. Records disappeared. One typo, one misclick, maybe on purpose, maybe not. I woke up in a civilian hospital with no rank, no home, and no command willing to speak my name. He paused, letting it land. Until yesterday. I hadn't heard that name, North Star, in 2 decades. Until my daughter pulled me out of silence with a crayon. A soft, audible swallow came from somewhere in the front row. General Hayes stepped forward, voice like steel, but trembling slightly. Captain Lane. I didn't know. I thought you were gone. I looked. For months. Michael raised a hand. You didn't fail me. The system did. He turned back to the audience. But my story isn't about what was taken. It's about what was rebuilt. He looked at Amelia again, her small face lifted toward him, eyes wide, proud. I rebuilt a life, quietly, humbly, with no parade. I swept floors that held shoes of men who once saluted me. And I taught my daughter what no classroom could teach her, that dignity doesn't come from titles. It comes from what you hold sacred, even when no one else does. There was a long pause. Then, without a cue, General Hayes turned toward the audience. This man, she said, saved my life. And 5 others. Under fire, against orders, while bleeding from his own wounds. He dragged us from a downed chopper through a minefield, while our air support was still 10 minutes out. She looked directly at a senator seated near the edge of the front row. His report was buried. His name was lost. Not by fate. By error, or worse, by convenience. A stunned murmur rippled through the room. And I, her voice cracked, have worn this tattoo every day to remind me that somewhere out there, a man gave up everything for his team. She turned back to Michael. I just didn't know he was still alive. Then came the silence. But it wasn't empty. It was sacred. An officer near the rear slowly rose from his seat. Then another. And another. In a rare break from every formal protocol, more than 40 uniformed and retired military members stood at attention. Some saluted. Some lowered their heads. Some simply placed a hand over their heart. Not because they were told to, but because they knew. They recognized him not just as a name lost in an old report, but as something rarer. A quiet hero who never asked to be remembered, but deserved. Never to be forgotten. Michael looked at them, then at Amelia, then down at his hand. The ink was faded, but in that moment the symbol burned bright. The compass that once marked his past had now become the legacy of a little girl who understood its meaning without ever hearing its origin. He looked back at Hayes and whispered, "The North never moved. We just stopped looking for it." The sound of boots echoed down the long corridor, each step slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of 20 years of silence. General Lena Hayes stood outside the custodial locker room, not a place where generals were ever meant to be. But the uniform on her chest didn't feel as heavy tonight as the one memory she'd carried through every promotion, every ceremony, every lonely night of Command Afghanistan. Operation Iron Haven, 2005. She raised her hand to knock, but paused. The name on the locker read simply, E.M. Lane, no rank, no title, no call sign, just a man. She knocked twice. Inside, Michael Lane was rinsing his hands. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn. "Thought you might come," he said quietly. Lena stepped in, closing the door behind her. For a moment, she looked out of place. 4 stars shimmering against an old bench, steel mop buckets, and a stack of folded blue towels. But in truth, this was closer to war than any boardroom, closer to the dust, the heat, the broken. "I haven't thought about Iron Haven in years," Lena said finally. Michael dried his hands with a cotton cloth. "I never stopped." She leaned against the wall, arms folded, as if bracing herself for something too large to hold. "You shouldn't have been on that mission," he said, glancing at her. "You were still 2 weeks out from rotation. You swapped flights with Commander Stroud, didn't you?" Lena nodded. "He had a kid being born back home. I figured I'd buy him a miracle." Michael gave a faint smile. "You did." She looked down. "We lost 4 that night. Came out with 6. I still see it. In dreams. The crash. The fire. That scream in the headset. Then you pulling me out barely conscious. You dragged us to that ridge with no cover. Just a flare stick and your sidearm." Michael didn't respond right away. He just stared into the sink's chipped porcelain basin, as if the memory lived there. "We were trained to die for each other," he said, "but not to live when the mission forgot us." Lena stepped forward slowly. Her voice softened. "Michael, your record was wiped clean. But I remember your call sign." She hesitated, then added, "North Star saved my life. But I never got to thank the man behind the ink." Michael turned, now face steady, but his eyes carried the sand and smoke of 20 years. Because the man behind the ink disappeared. He didn't just fall through the cracks, Lena. He was buried. And when I finally surfaced, no one came looking. She swallowed. "I did. I filed 5 separate inquiries. They were redacted before they reached you," he said. "A friend in Intel warned me years later. Someone didn't want Iron Haven revisited. Wrong names, wrong outcomes. I was a casualty of paperwork." Her fists clenched. "That's not acceptable." "No," he said, "but it's what happened. And by the time I realized I was truly alone, I already had Amelia." Lena blinked. "How old was she when you got her?" "I didn't get her," he said, voice low. "I had her. After I came back, there was no support, no pension. Her mother, she passed when Amelia was 2. All I had left was a mop, and apartment, and the promise I whispered in the chopper to every man I couldn't save, that I'd do something good with the life they gave me." The room fell silent. Then Lena spoke, not as a general, but as a woman who once stared death in the face and was pulled back by a stranger. "Michael, why didn't you tell anyone it was you?" "Why now?" He sat down on the bench, slow and methodical. "Because the tattoo isn't mine anymore," he said. "It's hers. Amelia's." Lena furrowed her brow. "She draws it," he continued. "Everywhere. On napkins, notebook covers, even her walls when she was little. I never showed it to her, never explained it. But it lives in her like a map she was born with, like a promise of direction." He looked up, and yesterday she saw your wrist, saw that it wasn't just a drawing, that it was real, that it meant something. Lena's throat tightened. "Children know more than we do sometimes." Michael nodded. "She asked me what it meant. I told her it pointed to people who don't quit on you, even when the world does." Lena crossed to the bench and sat beside him. Her metals clinked softly as she leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Michael," she said gently, "I don't want to just bring your name back. I want your story back. I want the truth out there. The people who erased you." He interrupted with a shake of his head. "No revenge, no tribunals. That's not why I spoke. That's not why Amelia pointed. Lena looked at him puzzled. Then what do you want? Michael met her gaze with quiet resolve. I want one day, he said, where she hears my name with pride, where she sees a photo on a wall and whispers, "That's my dad." Not because he made history, but because he didn't run from it. The two sat in stillness again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was healing. Outside the locker room, the world went on security clearances, processed coffee-brewed protocols reviewed. But inside, two people who were never supposed to see each other again shared something far rarer than ceremony truth. Lena rose, straightened her uniform, then turned to face him. I want to help, she said. Not for politics, not for optics. For her, and for the part of me you carried out of that wreckage. I think I owe both of you something I can never repay. Michael smiled gently. You already have, he said. She blinked. How you remembered me. Outside, the last rays of sun painted the marble halls gold. A little girl waited with her sketchbook and a compass drawn in red crayon. Somewhere in those lines, the ghosts of the desert faded a little more, and the stars, those that guided the lost, began to realign. The military archives building sat just a few blocks from the Pentagon, yet felt worlds away. Inside its granite walls were shelves upon shelves of service records, incident reports, unit logs, millions of pages that told the story of a nation's defenders one line at a time. General Lena Hayes sat alone in a secured records room, lit only by the glow of an overhead desk lamp. Her uniform jacket hung neatly on the back of the chair. The sleeves of her crisp white shirt rolled to her elbows. In front of her lay 3 thick manila folders, all of them stamped with red ink, classified, redacted, archived, and one name kept disappearing from every page, Captain Michael Lane. Call sign North Star. She opened the first file again, the official after-action report from Operation Ironhaven. The summary listed casualties, injuries, coordinates. The commanding officer's statement was there, half redacted, with references to a rogue operator who intervened beyond scope of mission and diverted evac efforts without approval. But the name omitted. Even more disturbing, the biometric scans from the field hospital had been mismatched. Michael's name was never tied to his own blood. Lena leaned back, her chest tight with guilt and disbelief. Someone had done more than forget him. Someone had erased him. She flipped open the second file, her own handwritten mission journal from 2005, which she had kept in secret. The pages were creased, smudged with sweat, tears, and sand. It wasn't an official document, but it was real. And there, halfway down page 14, Day 11 post-crash. Still haunted by the compass tattoo. The man who saved me, North Star, I owe him more than I'll ever be able to repay. She touched the ink, like it were a wound she hadn't let scab over. How had they buried this? And how had she let them? The third file was smaller, older, a personal effects folder. Inside was a single letter folded yellowing. It was hers. A letter she'd written 20 years ago, left unsent in her footlocker after the mission. If you're alive, I want you to know you saved more than lives that night. You saved belief, in courage, in grace under fire, in goodness. I'll wear your compass not just as a reminder of that night, but of the man who stood for something when everything else was falling apart. She exhaled slowly, then stood up, and made a decision. The next day, Lena returned to the Personnel Integrity Review Office, a bureaucratic labyrinth where reputations were evaluated, misconduct reviewed, and honors granted or revoked. She stepped into the director's office unannounced. Behind the desk sat Brigadier General Curtis Mahoney, a man with a sharp jaw, perfectly trimmed mustache, and the manner of someone who valued chain of command above all else. He looked up surprised. General Hayes. To what do I owe the I need a case reopened? She said, placing the files on his desk with calm precision. He raised an eyebrow. On whose authority? Mine. Mahoney leaned forward, flipping through the pages. His fingers paused on the redacted lines. He frowned. This is old, he muttered. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you, Lena said, to restore a man's name to the record. A man who was listed as missing, later marked deceased, then discharged as a non-combatant, without benefits, rank, or recognition. Mahoney leaned back. That's not something we do lightly. She didn't blink. And this isn't a light case. He eyed her suspicious now. Who is the individual? She answered with no hesitation. Captain Michael Lane. Tall sign North Star. There was silence. Then Mahoney sat up straighter. That name's been off our books since someone decided to remove it, Lena snapped. She leaned forward now, voice firm. I reviewed the original field report. I reviewed the post-op documents. His signature is on none of them because he wasn't allowed to sign. I found his blood type recorded under someone else's name. I found a discharge sheet with a fake duty station. And I found proof that someone in admin deliberately misfiled his service log. Mahoney exhaled, suddenly wary. You're suggesting internal cover-up. I'm not suggesting she said. I'm confirming. He shook his head. You know what you're opening up, General. If we bring this back into review, there will be hearings, investigations, potential repercussions on high-ranking officers, some of whom are still active. I'm aware. And you're willing to risk your own reputation over this? Lena didn't hesitate. I'm not risking my reputation. I'm honoring the man who risked everything to save mine. Back at the Pentagon, Michael pushed a mop bucket through a quiet hallway just off the executive wing. He wasn't thinking about medals. He was thinking about lunch money for Amelia, about fixing the sink in their apartment, about her upcoming math quiz and the little compass she drew on her pencil case that morning. He didn't see himself as part of any mission anymore. Just a dad. Just someone trying to do the next right thing. He turned a corner and froze. Lena stood there, in full uniform, holding a folder. She walked up slowly and handed it to him. He opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a reinstatement order, temporary pending full review. His name, Captain Michael Lane. And below it, service record reactivated under investigative protection. All prior honors subject to immediate restoration review. Michael stared at it for a long time, then looked up. You went back for me, he whispered. No, Lena said softly, her eyes shining. You came back for all of us. I'm just doing what I should have done a long time ago. He nodded slowly, not with triumph, but with quiet peace. Thank you, he said. Lena stepped back, saluted him. The gesture was not casual, not symbolic. It was regulation. A salute from a four-star general to a man the system once forgot. And Michael, after a breath, returned it. Clean. Sharp. Unshaken. That night in their apartment just outside Arlington, Amelia sat cross-legged on the living room rug sketchbook, open a new compass forming on the page. Daddy, she said, without looking up when they say, hero. What do they mean? Michael sat beside her, still in his uniform. They mean someone who chooses light, he said, brushing a hand over her hair. Even when the world turns dark. She smiled, then drew a tiny star above the compass. The sun hung low over the Pentagon courtyard, casting long shadows across the stone. Down one of the back corridors, freshly polished floors reflected the golden light, but the hallway was otherwise silent, save for the rhythmic, steady sound of a janitor's mop gliding across the tile. Michael Lane didn't look up when the boots approached. He could tell just from the weight and pace that the person walking toward him wasn't enlisted. officers had a different rhythm, trained, clipped, decisive. But this one paused. Michael wrung out the mop and leaned it against the wall before turning. It was General Lena Hayes. But her face told him this wasn't a routine visit. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man in a dark suit, mid-50s, with cold eyes, and a folder clutched in his hands like a weapon. His presence had the weight of bureaucracy, of consequences, dressed in pinstripes. Michael gave a slight nod. Something tells me this isn't about floor wax. Lena didn't smile. Her jaw was tight, her posture straight, but her eyes were conflicted. "Michael," she said calmly, "this is Agent Victor Keene, Inspector General's office." Keene stepped forward, voice clipped, like a man who'd done this too many times to care. "Captain Lane, I've been assigned to conduct a review of your reinstatement request. Given the nature of your prior discharge, we're required to ensure no security threats or procedural violations occurred during your reclassification." Michael didn't flinch. "I understand. But you won't find any threats here, Agent." Keene opened the folder. "Your field reports were lost. Your biometric scan was mismatched. Your discharge papers cite non-combatant status, yet multiple high-ranking officers now claim you acted heroically in direct violation of orders. That creates complications." Michael held his gaze. "I didn't violate orders. I responded when command went silent. When I heard people screaming through broken comms, I moved. That's not insubordination. That's survival." Keene flipped a page. "You were never listed as part of Operation Ironhaven." Michael nodded. That's what someone wanted. Lena stepped in, her voice cool but unmistakably sharp. "Agent Keene, I've reviewed the logs. The inconsistencies aren't Michael's doing. They were fabricated." Keene raised an eyebrow. "Allegations of forgery and suppression are serious, General. If you're suggesting someone tampered with military records, we'd need to open an entirely separate investigation." "I'm not suggesting she said. I'm stating." Michael stayed silent, watching. There was something deeper in Lena's eyes, not just loyalty, but fury. She wasn't just defending him now. She was confronting the machine that nearly erased them both. Keene snapped the folder shut. "In the meantime," he said coldly, "you are not to wear your uniform until this matter is formally resolved." Michael glanced down at the navy blue jacket folded beside his mop bucket, freshly pressed, his name tag gleaming faintly under the overhead lights. He didn't argue. Instead, he quietly picked it up, folded it once more, and placed it back in the locker without a word. Later that afternoon, Michael stood outside the building watching Amelia chase pigeons through the plaza. She spun with her arms out like an airplane, laughing, her hair catching the sunlight like strands of copper. Lena joined him, holding 2 coffees. "You're handling this better than I am," she said, handing him a cup. "I've been cleaning government buildings longer than you've been a general," he replied with a faint smile. "I know how slow the system moves. Sometimes the dirt's not on the floor, it's in the files." Lena looked down, troubled. "It's my fault. I should have fought harder back then. I should have tracked your records, demanded answers." Michael cut her off gently. "You were recovering from a crash, leading missions, climbing a ladder built by men who didn't want you there. You had your own war to fight." She looked at him. "And you fought yours alone?" "No," he said, watching Amelia. "I had someone with me. She just didn't know it yet." Inside the Inspector General's office, Agent Keene sat alone, replaying security footage from the Medal of Valor reception. Frame by frame, he watched Michael step onto the stage, saw him speak. He paused on the moment where Amelia handed her father a folded paper. Zoomed in. It was a child's drawing, a compass crudely outlined in red crayon with a star at the center, and 2 words beneath it. "Daddy. Hero." Keene exhaled. He rubbed his eyes. He didn't want to care. Didn't want to feel the stir of something beneath the cold logic of protocol. But he did. and it unsettled him, because he had spent a career chasing ghosts and frauds. But this man was real, and he'd been forgotten. That night, Michael tucked Amelia into bed. Her small hands clutched the sketchbook. Her compass drawing now had tiny wings on either side. "You're gonna fly again, Daddy," she whispered. "I can feel it." Michael knelt beside her, brushed the hair from her forehead. "I already did," he said softly. "When you were born." She blinked, confused. "But you don't have a plane anymore." He smiled. "I don't need one. You're my wings now." She giggled, then yawned, her eyes drifting shut. And for a long time, Michael sat beside her in the quiet glow of the nightlight, his call sign echoing silently in the room. North Star. The name wasn't gone. It was waiting. Just like the truth. The next morning, a confidential memo slid across a high-ranking officer's desk in the Pentagon. Subject reactivation review. Capped. Michael Lane recommendation. Expedite clearance for full reinstatement. Classified suppression confirmed in archived comms. Chain of responsibility leads back to decommissioned units and now retired personnel. No further risk. Handwritten addendum. This man didn't disappear. We made him disappear. Let's start making that right. VK. It began with one sentence. Buried inside a 30-page memo from the Inspector General's office, appended as a quiet footnote. Service record for Captain Michael Lane confirmed, suppressed by administrative override during post-operation Iron Haven debrief. Internal manipulation suspected. Further inquiry recommended. The memo wasn't supposed to leave the internal loop. But by 10:47 a.m., the next morning, a redacted version had been leaked. And by noon, it was everywhere. Decorated Air Force. Captain erased from military history for 20 years. Now, reinstated, the Washington Sentinel, the man they buried on paper. How bureaucracy nearly killed a hero's legacy. Military review. Daily North Star is real. Veterans rally behind forgotten comrade. Vets United Online Forum. The story ignited something. Among enlisted men and women, those who had served quietly and returned to lives of anonymity, it stirred a long dormant ache. Among commanders, it reopened old wounds. And among Washington elites, it created tension. Because buried beneath every system was a name. And now the world knew it. At the Pentagon Central Plaza, Michael Lane walked with a quiet steadiness that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with presence. He wasn't there to bask in headlines. He was there to make sure Amelia made it to the front gate of her art class 2 blocks away. She skipped beside him, backpack bouncing, holding her latest drawing, a compass, with wings traced in gold. She looked up at him. "Why are people staring, Daddy?" He smiled gently. "Because sometimes the world forgets how to be kind. And when it remembers, it doesn't know where to look." She nodded solemnly like she understood. She always did. Across the country, veterans began posting photos of their unit tattoos, some of them decades old. North Star, never fades, trended within hours. Some posted memories. Others shared regrets. A few admitted they'd served under Captain Lane in Iron Haven, never knowing what became of him. At a small VFW hall in Kentucky, an old soldier named Donnie Ox Martinez posted a video. "We always thought North Star didn't make it. We held a toast for him in 2006. Turns out he was right here, raising a little girl, cleaning our marble floors. That's the kind of man you want at the front of the room. Not forgotten, not erased." Meanwhile, at the Senate Defense Subcommittee, unease stirred. Because if Michael Lane had been erased once, how many others had Senator Rebecca Cole, a sharp, steel-eyed former JAG officer, read the leaked report 3 times before calling a special hearing? Her request was simple. "I want everyone involved in the suppression of Captain Lane's record brought forward. Names, dates, Chain of command. I don't care if they're retired, promoted, or buried under pensions. This country doesn't get to abandon its heroes in paper trails. At home, Michael didn't talk about it. He didn't speak to reporters, didn't accept invitations to speak at bases, didn't give interviews. He folded laundry, made mac and cheese, walked Amelia to school, fixed the loose stair on the front porch. But when Lena Hayes arrived one afternoon with a box in her hands, he paused. Inside the box was a folded flag, a replica of his original citation for valor, and the remnants of a photograph, once thought lost 6 soldiers, crouched together under a tarp. Faces mud-streaked, exhausted but smiling. Lena placed the box on his kitchen table. I had a few friends in records, she said. They found the original negatives. Thought you should have them. Michael stared at the photo. His hand shook slightly. These men, they're all gone. Lena nodded. Except you. He sat slowly picking up the flag. His thumb brushed the edge of the citation. For a moment, he just stared, unsure if what he was holding was real or another dream he'd learned not to trust. Lena sat across from him. No uniform today, just jeans, a simple blouse, and a weariness in her eyes that felt older than rank. We're building a memorial at Langley, she said, for classified operations that never received official acknowledgement. Your name will be there. So will the others. Michael looked at her. It won't bring them back. No, she said, but it will tell the world they were real. He looked down again. Sometimes I wondered if I was, he whispered. Lena reached across the table, her fingers resting lightly over his. You were. You are. And now, you won't be forgotten. That evening, as dusk painted the apartment windows in warm gold, Michael sat beside Amelia on the couch. She was sketching another compass, but this time she drew 2. One for him, one for her. They overlapped in the center. She called it Shared North. She looked up at him. Is it true people are mad because they didn't believe you were a hero? Michael thought for a long time. Then he said, No, honey. They're not mad because they didn't believe me. They're mad because they stopped asking where I went. She nodded, then added stars around the compass. Tiny ones, bright. Maybe now they'll look up, she said. He pulled her close, held her there. And in that moment he felt something return, not medals or status or validation, but lightness. For the first time in 20 years, the air in his lungs didn't carry the weight of unfinished stories. Later that night, in a quiet room beneath the Pentagon, an officer placed a sticky note on a document marked Closed. It read, Reopened. On orders of Janitor Hayes and Senator Cole. Truth doesn't stay buried forever. And just beneath it, someone else had scrawled in pen, North Star leads again. The sun rose gently over Arlington that morning, casting long, solemn light across the endless rows of headstones. The air was still reverent, as if the city itself had chosen to breathe a little slower, speak a little softer. At the Pentagon, the eastern entrance was flanked by 2 guards in full ceremonial dress. A red, white, and blue banner had been quietly unfurled above the marble steps, but there were no camera crews, no press vans, no political entourages. Just a name, Michael Lane, and a date that for most meant nothing. But for those who knew those who had waited 20 years for a story to be unburied, it meant everything. Inside the Medal of Valor auditorium, the chairs had been rearranged. Front row veterans from Ironhaven who had quietly come out of the shadows. Behind them, Lena Hayes, Agent Victor Keene, Senator Rebecca Cole. To the side stood a small easel holding a child's drawing of a compass mounted in a wooden frame. It was Amelia's. And on the far end of the aisle, dressed in a restored officer's uniform, Air Force blue-collar, crisp ribbons freshly pinned, stood Captain Michael Lane. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't weeping. He stood like a mountain, quiet-rooted patient. as if waiting wasn't something new to him, as if 20 years had been only a pause. The voice that broke the silence was familiar. General Lena Hayes in full dress stepped to the podium. She didn't open with protocol. No preamble. No acknowledgement of dignitaries. Just truth. There are men who wear their honors the moment they earn them. And then there are men who wear them in silence, for decades, without complaint. She looked out over the room, but her gaze lingered on Amelia seated in the front row, her feet not quite reaching the floor. 20 years ago, I was pulled from a burning aircraft by a man whose name was never written into the official report. A man whose actions saved 6 lives. A man who was presumed dead, and then treated as if he never existed at all. She paused, her voice clear but trembling. That ends today. She stepped aside as the military band played the slow, deliberate notes of the Air Force ceremonial theme. Then, with the quiet dignity of a soldier, receiving no more than what was already his, Michael Lane stepped onto the platform. The applause was not thunderous. It was deep, from the chest, from the soul, from men and women who understood exactly what it meant to carry something for so long without asking the world to notice. As Lena turned to him, a velvet case was handed to her. She opened it, revealing a metal polished to gleam like sunlight, the Air Force Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor in combat. Beneath it, a bronze bar etched with a single name, North Star. Lena's voice softened. Captain Michael Lane. For extraordinary heroism, unwavering courage under enemy fire, and sacrifice beyond measure. The United States Air Force formally recognizes your actions during Operation Ironhaven. Though your name was silenced, your actions never were. She looked him in the eyes no longer as general to subordinate, but as equal to equal. Welcome back, sir. Michael didn't move at first. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned, knelt before Amelia, and handed her the case. She blinked, confused. But it's yours. Michael smiled. No, sweetheart. It's ours. She opened the case slowly, her small fingers brushing the metal's edge. Then she looked up and asked, "Can I pin it on you?" Silence swept the room. Lena Hayes gave a single nod. Michael bent slightly, and with shaking hands, Amelia clipped the metal over his heart. When she finished, she threw her arms around him. "You really are North Star," she whispered. "No," he murmured back. "You're my North Star now." The crowd stood, not in ceremony but in reverence. Some saluted, some simply placed hands over hearts, and one elderly colonel whispered into the quiet. They finally got it right. After the ceremony, people slowly filtered out. The brass instruments were packed away, the lights dimmed, the flags gently folded. But Michael stayed behind. He stood in front of Amelia's framed compass, drawing gold wings stretched wide around a bold black star. Lena joined him, standing silently. "She did this?" she asked. Michael nodded. "It's how she found me." Lena smiled softly. "She didn't just find you. She reminded us." He looked at her. "She's why I spoke up," he said. "Not for revenge. Not even for the medal. Just so she'd know I didn't disappear. That I chose to stay." Lena nodded. "And now, the world knows, too." Later that evening, back at their modest apartment, Amelia placed the metal case carefully on the shelf above the kitchen table, next to a jar of crayons and a photo of her mom. Michael watched from the doorway. "Daddy?" she asked. "Yes, honey." She looked at the medal. "Do you think anyone else has one of these?" He smiled. "Plenty do. But do they have daughters who draw them wings?" He chuckled. "I doubt it." She leaned against him. "Then ours is better." Outside, the stars were beginning to appear, faint at first, but steady. Michael stepped out onto the porch, looked up at the sky. For a moment, he imagined his old team watching, listening, smiling. Then he whispered to the night, "We made it. Finally." And somewhere between the compass and the stars, between honor and healing, between memory and redemption, the forgotten hero stood, seen, named, and never again lost. The box arrived 3 days after the ceremony. No return address, no insignia, just Michael's name, handwritten in blocky, careful script on the brown paper packaging. Amelia found it first sitting on the welcome mat outside their apartment door. "Daddy," she called, "someone sent you something." Michael stepped out of the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel, brow furrowed. He hadn't expected anything. No shipments, no follow-ups. And after 20 years of silence, he'd learned to be cautious with surprises. He set the box gently on the dining table and opened it. Inside were 2 items. One wrapped in linen, a standard-issue Air Force sidearm, the serial number scratched, but still visible. He knew it instantly. His weapon. The second, a sealed envelope yellowed by age with his name typed on the front. Not Janitor. Not Sir. Just Capt. Michael Lane. The ink had faded, but the name was unmistakable. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he turned the envelope over in his hands, as if trying to sense the weight of what lay inside. The air around him felt stiller, almost sacred. Lena Hayes arrived 30 minutes later. She hadn't knocked. She didn't need to. Amelia had called her. "There's a letter," the little girl had whispered. "He's just staring at it." When Lena stepped inside, Michael looked up. Quiet, composed, but his eyes said more than words could. He handed her the envelope. "You're writing?" he asked. She shook her head. He opened it slowly, careful not to tear the fragile paper. Inside was a single page, typed, signed in ink. "If you're reading this, it means someone had the guts to dig deeper. My name is Colonel Nathaniel Royce, 3rd Special Tactics Squadron. In 2000, I authorized Operation Iron Haven under Joint Command. The mission was flawed, under-resourced, under-briefed, and when the dust settled, someone had to take the fall. You, Captain Lane. Your report was altered, your actions redacted, your discharge falsified. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded in a way that embarrassed the system. You saved lives we were supposed to write off as collateral. You forced us to acknowledge a rescue never authorized. I tried to intervene. I tried to refile your name back into the system. But my clearance was revoked. I was forced to retire months later under review. But I kept your gun. I kept your letter. I kept your name. Because some truths don't need orders to be remembered. I don't expect forgiveness. Only that if the world ever wakes up, you know someone was still on your side. Colonel Nathaniel Royce, Rettorber, April 7th, 2006. Michael read it once, then again, and the silence afterward felt like the closing of a long, painful loop. Lena sat down across from him. Royce. He was one of the best. But he vanished from radar. Everyone assumed he took a golden parachute. Michael shook his head. No. He took the fall. Amelia hovered nearby. What's it mean, Daddy? He looked up, and for a moment his voice almost faltered. It means the truth. Found its way home. They placed the gun back in its linen wrap and set it in the display case beside his medal. Amelia took the letter and carefully smoothed the folds, then reached for a magnet on the fridge. Can we keep it where we see it? She asked. So we don't forget, Michael nodded. No, sweetheart, he said. So no one forgets. So, later that night, Michael stepped onto the back porch with a cup of coffee, the letter still echoing in his mind. The breeze was cool, quiet, healing. Lena joined him, her hair down, eyes soft with thought. You were right, she said. About what? About how the system forgets the quiet ones. You never yelled, never demanded, you just kept showing up. Michael chuckled. It's funny. I always thought justice would come with fanfare, spotlights, maybe even fireworks. Lena smiled. Turns out it comes in a plain brown box. He nodded, then turned to her. You ever wonder what would have happened if that crash hadn't happened? If I never pulled you out of that chopper all the time, she said. And I always come to the same answer. Michael raised an eyebrow, which is, I never would have become the woman I am. Or the general. I never would have led the way I do not if I didn't owe everything to someone the world tried to erase. Michael looked away, quietly humbled. Then Lena reached into her coat and pulled out something small, a compass pendant. Rusted. Simple. Hanging on a chain. I wore this into every combat zone for the next 10 years, she said, because you gave me direction when the world was chaos. She placed it in his hand. Now it's yours again. Michael stared at the pendant, then gently folded her fingers back over it. No, he said softly. It belongs with you. That night, Michael returned to Amelia's room to find her asleep sketchbook on her chest. He gently took it, flipping through the pages. One caught his eye, a drawing of 2 compasses overlapping at the center, surrounded by 6 small stars. Above them, in Amelia's neat handwriting, not all stars burn, some just guide. Michael closed the book slowly, his throat tight. He sat beside her, brushing her hair back, and in a voice barely above a whisper said, I'm not afraid of being forgotten anymore. Because now, we remember. Far away in a retirement home outside Colorado Springs, a man in a worn cardigan watched the news. On screen, Michael Lane's story played in quiet reverence. Colonel Nathaniel Royce nodded once, then smiled. And for the first time in years, he whispered aloud, Welcome back, Captain. The building had once been a warehouse. Cold steel bones, broken windows, a forgotten corner of the city, where time had rusted everything but the air. Now it was alive. The walls were freshly painted, a soft shade of sage green. Light from the east-facing windows poured in through clean glass, warming the open space where mismatched chairs and workbenches lined the room. Children's drawings decorated one wall, and beneath them hung a hand-carved wooden sign, the North Star Center for Veterans, for families, for home. At the center of it all stood Michael Lane, holding a hammer in one hand and a blueprint in the other, squinting toward the half-installed shelving on the west wall. A familiar voice called out from across the room. You do realize you've rebuilt half the structure since Mondays, right? Michael turned, grinning. Lena Hayes stood in the doorway, not in uniform, but in jeans and a simple tan jacket. She held 2 coffees and a clipboard. I don't trust a shelf that doesn't groan under its own weight, he said. She walked over and handed him a coffee. It's starting to look like more than a center. He nodded quietly. Because it's more than a building. It's a map. After the medal ceremony and the letter from Colonel Royce, Michael had declined dozens of speaking offers, TV interviews, and commemorative dedications. Instead, he asked for something simpler. A space. A space where those like him, the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the forgotten ones, could come in from the cold. Where children of single parents could find tutoring. Where veterans could get job training, emotional support, and more than anything, a place to sit and breathe without pretending. And thanks to Lena and to a few newly repentant members of the Defense Committee, the funding had come through. But it wasn't money that built the walls. It was hands, veterans, teachers, retirees, teenagers from the local ROTC, a former pilot who now worked as a mechanic, a single mom who'd once served in logistics, and every day, Amelia. She painted. She carried nails. She made name signs out of reclaimed wood for every room. One read Captain's Corner, for stories not yet told. That afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the workshop floor, a man arrived wearing a faded army jacket and a guarded look. His name was Caleb Morris, mid-40s, honorably discharged, divorced, living out of his truck. He didn't speak at first, just hovered at the entrance. Michael noticed. He always noticed. He walked over, slow and respectful. "Welcome. You looking for the employment board or just coffee?" Caleb hesitated. "I'm not sure." Michael offered a small smile. "That's a valid answer. Come in anyway." They sat, talked. No clipboard, no judgment. By the time Caleb left, he'd signed up for resume help, a construction crew lead role, and art night with Amelia's sketch group. Because sometimes the first step wasn't finding a job, it was being seen. A few nights later, Michael and Lena sat outside on the porch of the center as the final coat of paint dried on the mural outside. It showed a compass wrapped around a sunrise. And in the corner, in small black lettering, "Faith never leaves you." Michael sipped his coffee. "I used to think my service ended the day they discharged me." Lena leaned back. "It didn't. It just changed battlefields." He nodded. "I thought being forgotten was the worst thing that could happen to a soldier." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her. "Now I know the worst thing isn't being forgotten. It's believing your story no longer matters." She smiled, eyes glinting in the fading light. "Then you've done something incredible. You've made this place a story factory." Michael chuckled. "That's Amelia's term. Of course it is." That weekend, the center hosted its first community dinner. No uniforms, no speeches, just long tables, folded chairs, homemade chili, a playlist of soft country and quiet jazz. Michael stood at the back for most of it, watching, listening. A young woman with prosthetic legs taught a little boy how to paint a dog. A Marine veteran slow danced with his wife to a song they hadn't heard since 1979. An old man with a stutter read a poem aloud, and no one interrupted. Amelia pulled her father into a hug near the lemonade stand and whispered, "I think the North Star moved." He looked down, smiling. "No, sweetheart. We just got closer to it." Late that night, Michael returned home with a paper bag of leftover cookies and a stack of hand-drawn thank you cards. On top was one drawn in blue crayon. It showed two hands clasped over a map with the words, "Thank you for not giving up." He set it beside his medal case, and beside it the framed letter from Royce. All of it now part of something bigger. A second sunrise. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like the compass star that bore his name. Meanwhile, in a corner of the country, a small Air Force base hung a new plaque on its wall of honor. It bore a single name, Captain Michael Lane. Call sign, North Star, no fanfare. Just the quiet sound of boots stopping to read, and a child's voice whispering, "Daddy." I know that name. It was Sunday night. The air was cool, the kind that carried the scent of leaves turning of summer, giving way to something slower, quieter. In the North Star Center, the lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow. Most of the volunteers had gone home. The tools were tucked away. The floors swept clean. Only Michael Lane and Amelia remained sitting cross-legged on a rug in the library corner, surrounded by books they hadn't yet shelved. Amelia held an old field journal, leather-bound, its pages yellowing with time. "Did you really write this during the war?" she asked, eyes wide. Michael nodded. "Whenever we had downtime. Or when we thought we didn't, but needed to believe we did." She opened to a random page. Sketched in the corner was a rough compass, and under it words. In pencil, direction isn't about where you're going. It's about who you refuse to leave behind. She looked up at him. "Is that what you did?" You didn't leave them behind. His gaze softened. I tried, sweetheart. Sometimes I couldn't save them. But I never walked away. Amelia thought for a moment, then leaned her head on his shoulder. I want to be like that. He kissed the top of her head. You already are. Outside the window, the lamplight caught the new sign at the gate. The North Star Center Guided by Service. Rooted in hope. Beneath it, in smaller lettering, established in honor of those who stood when the world turned away. Michael stood slowly, stretching his back. His body bore the years now, scars, stiffness, the quiet grind of a life lived in full weight. But he moved with peace. Come on, he said. I want to show you something. They stepped out into the night under a sky full of stars. The path behind the building led to a small garden they'd planted in spring. It wasn't much, a few benches, a stone mosaic, and a circle of smooth pavers set around a low granite monument. The compass. Not a statue. Not a tribute. Just a stone compass rose, hand-carved by local vets, each direction labeled not with letters, but with names. Honor. Courage. Sacrifice. Faith. Michael knelt beside it, brushing away a leaf that had fallen over the center. Do you know why I named it the North Star? He asked. Amelia nodded. Because it helps people find their way. He smiled. Yes, but more than that. Because it never moves. He looked up at her. Even when the world spins. Even when storms come. The North Star stays. He placed his palm gently over the center stone. And I needed something to stay. Something to believe in when nothing else felt solid. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then asked, was that something? Me, Michael's breath caught. He turned, pulled her gently into a hug and whispered, it was always you. Inside the center, General Lena Hayes arrived quietly through the side entrance. She didn't want attention. She carried a small envelope. When Michael and Amelia returned from the garden, she was already waiting in the library. She handed him the envelope. What's this? He asked. Lena exhaled. I pulled one last string. This one took some convincing. Michael opened it. Inside was a single slip of parchment marked with the seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It read, by unanimous vote. Captain Michael Lane's call sign. North Star is to be enshrined in the National Registry of Legacy Leadership Symbols to be taught in the Leadership Ethics curriculum of the U.S. Air Force Academy. Michael stared, then blinked. I never asked for this, he said softly. I know, Lena replied, but that's exactly why you deserve it. He looked at the second page, a short statement written by the Ethics Committee. North Star is no longer the name of a man. It is now a symbol of unwavering moral direction, especially when the chain of command forgets where north is. Michael said nothing. He simply folded the paper with care and handed it to Amelia. It's yours now, he said. She blinked. Me, he smiled. If anyone ever asks what it means, tell them it's where faith goes when the lights go out. Weeks later, Amelia stood at the front of her school gymnasium holding her dad's medal in her small hands. The auditorium was full of students and parents. She looked out nervously. Then began. My daddy used to clean the floors in a big building where no one knew his name. But he never stopped believing in what he stood for. He told me the North Star helps people who are lost. And now, he helps people find home again. So if you ever feel like no one sees you, look up. That star hasn't moved. The crowd was still. Some teachers wiped their eyes. A veteran in the back stood slowly and saluted. That night, Michael sat on the porch in silence. The stars shimmered above. Lena joined him, 2 mugs of tea in hand. You're quiet, she said. Just thinking. About he looked at the sky. How something so far away can keep people alive, just by staying still. She nodded. Then he added, and how sometimes A man doesn't need to be famous. He just needs to be faithful. She looked at him, and in that moment, under the stars, beside the girl who saved him without ever knowing it, beside a woman who remembered when no one else would, Michael Lane finally felt it. Not vindication, not reward, but something deeper. Belonging. As the wind passed over the rooftop, Amelia stepped out holding her sketchbook. She opened it to the last page, a compass. But this time, the center was shaped like a heart. And beneath it, she wrote, "Faith never leaves you, and neither will I." Some heroes wear medals, others wear time. But the greatest ones, the ones no system can erase, leave behind something no bureaucracy can bury, a compass, a daughter, and a light that never fades if you're still here. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, whether it's a quiet town, a big city, or somewhere in between. Your presence matters here. If this story touched your heart, and you'd like to hear more true-to-life tales of courage, kindness, and second chances, please consider subscribing to our channel. We'd be honored to have you as part of this growing community. And from all of us here, thank you for watching. Until next time, may you always follow your North Star.